I've traveled all over the world and I've met incredible people, highly successful people, leaders, volunteers, change makers. But still, when it comes down to Battletown, the wisdom of the people there, their giving hearts, and their unique character, I'm in awe of the place where I was raised and the things that I learned and what was really truly important in life and what really defines success. And in Battletown, success comes from relationships and happiness and love and helping one another and acting like one unit instead of a bunch of people just living together. They really do have the spirit of a village and of a community, a common unity, and that is Battletown. So I lived in Battletown until I was 18 years old.
I am a small town girl from Battletown, Kentucky. I lived there until I was 17 years old.
I lived in Battletown, Kentucky until I was 21 years old.
For about 60 years, I guess.
And have lived there most of my life.
I lived in Battletown for 25 years.
From birth until I married my husband.
All my life, 69 years.
Although I never lived there again, Battletown was and is always my home. No matter what state I lived in, special times were made when I traveled home. When I was born, my parents lived in a one-room house without water or electricity. There was a wooden box on the porch outside of the kitchen window. They used that as a refrigerator. When food items were needed, the window was simply opened. My crib was a large shoebox. Life in Battletown was simple and rural. There was one stop sign, 3 grocery stores, 4 churches, and a post office housed in one of the grocery stores.
At the top of the hill was the first church, then you would come to the school and then go down a big hill and there was a crossroads, and at the crossroads were 2 of the stores and the post office, and that was kind of what we considered like the center of town.
When you go through Battletown, all you can do is go down, make a loop, and come back out. But Battletown sits on a corner of Kentucky, and if you kept going, you'd run straight in the river.
And the beauty being right there along the Ohio River, this little tiny town that if you drove through, you would miss it.
Was a hub of activity, particularly in late afternoons and Saturday mornings when people from the outlying farms would come to town, as they called it. It was a place where all the action was. There was always a horseshoe game in the lot there beside the store, and there were old men that were telling stories, and the tobacco chewers were chewing tobacco.
My favorite spot in Battletown is probably the porch on the Crawford store. On Friday and Saturday nights, we would go, everybody'd kind of go their own way and do their own thing. Then we would come back about midnight and sit on the store benches, and everybody would tell stories about where they had been that night and what they had done.
Later, men formed a volunteer fire department in an old storage building. The men would also gather there to play cards.
One of my stories was that it took us so long to get there that when we started buying equipment, we bought step ladders. And a lot of people said, step ladders? Why in the world would you buy step ladders? And because by the time we got there, we had nothing to lean our ladders against.
As a teenager, I had the privilege to work for Mr. Hamilton at his grocery store. He had a pet snake, and he often kept it inside his shirt. The first time I saw the snake stick its head outside the shirt, I froze, but soon learned that was just Mr. Hamilton's ways.
The social life in Battletown was pretty much surrounded by the churches and the schools, and almost everyone participated.
Times were more laid back then. My granddad believed in education. Although he didn't have much schooling himself, he made sure his kids did, all 9 of them. When my mom graduated from high school, he set her up in a one-room school, teaching 1st grade through 8th grade. Several of her students were her own brothers and sisters. Later, Granddad was on the school board, and he was instrumental in getting the school built in Battletown.
When we were kids, the school had just opened up. The kids before my class actually had to go to one-room schoolhouse. So we were the first class to go all the way through Battletown School. And then later on, I came back and taught school at Battletown for several years.
It was like a huge family, and the friendships that I made, even the kids that I started 1st grade with, are still some of my best friends.
My sister-in-law has wrote a book, 2 books actually, had them published about the witch that lives in the school. And she roams up and down the school, and they've had ghost hunters in there and have seen her and all this stuff. And if you're lucky enough to be there, you can feel her presence or even see her shadow or whatever.
The post office was another place for the townspeople to gather and visit.
Actually, the post office was in my grandfather's, the front room of his house, and I always thought that was neat, and that I was pretty famous.
Mom was in the post office, so she knew if anyone was sick, if anyone's check didn't come in the mail, or if anyone had a need, Mom generally knew it, and people would take food, do whatever, and help one another. And it was just a time when people didn't judge people, and people were good to one another.
Battletown also has 3 huge rock quarries, and the rock that they go after is called oolite rock, and it's one of the few places in the United States that has it. It's ground up for lime, gravel, all kinds of things, but they are major rock quarries.
Most people were farmers, like my granddad, or they worked at the rock quarry. The grandkids would help Granddad work on the farm. The boys would take in hay and strip tobacco, both hard work. It prepared them for the football team later on. The girls would gather eggs and bring in produce.
Battletown has produced state representatives, judges, boat captains. It has actually had very intelligent people come out of Battletown.
Within basically a mile was my whole universe. I didn't realize what else I was ever missing. We'd have to go all the way to Louisville, Kentucky to go to the doctor. Instead, I learned so much about the world and entertaining yourself and having an imagination. And then on top of that, you have the stories of how the town was founded. I mean, it was 2 men in a fight over trading shotguns and wives, and they wrestled for like 2 days, and the postmaster was trying to come up with a name for the town, and so they came up with Battletown. Only witch in the United States to be burned was in Battletown. Way back in the day, they locked this girl named Leah Smock in her smokehouse and burned her because they were afraid she was a witch.
People will say that if you didn't live in Battletown, then you don't understand Battletown, and that's very true. It was such a family-oriented group of people. We went to school together, we went to church together, went trick-or-treating together. It didn't matter whether you had money or didn't have money, nobody cared.
In the early days, we had a wooden crank phone hanging on the wall. Most people did not have phones, but word got around, especially in times of need. Kids did not have phones or other technology, and we had to get creative in our play. We used what we found, and we played hard, walking all over the community, going from house to house. My brother always said that like free-range chickens, we were free-range kids.
We play war and go into caves and little water stream areas, and sometimes even we would sneak over to the quarry and
We would swim in the river, and some of us, especially me since I was not a good swimmer, would use watermelons as flotation devices. Afterwards, Joe Mack would hit the melons on a rock, and we would all dig in for that sweet treat. Of course, there was always a watermelon food fight with the leftovers.
We didn't have many sleds, so what we would use was car hoods. There was a lot of old car hoods laying around, so and so many more could get on a car hood than you could a sled. So we liked our car hoods.
All of the kids loved Halloween. There were no Walmarts to buy a costume. So again, we would get creative and work with what we had.
And we would start really early because even though there wasn't many people, it took forever because you didn't just knock on the door and get some store-bought candy. You had to come in and they would pretend like they didn't know who you were, and then finally, after you visited with them for a while, you would get the most wonderful homemade candies, fudges, popcorn balls.
My sisters and all the other cousins in the community, we were all close. We all grew up together and played together and fought together.
Cousins were more like sisters and brothers back then.
The people in Battletown took care of one another, and everyone knew everyone.
The kids would meet, and we just had run of the town. We'd go anywhere. We had 1,500 acres of woods that we played in, and whoever's houses that we ended up at lunchtime, they would take us in and feed us. But if we did anything out of the way, the same people would correct you. So it's just like, and if you did something bad enough, and word got back to mom and dad, that was bad news.
The saying, "It takes a village," is true. The whole community looked after us and taught us. Get-togethers were not only fun, but important. Often families would combine meals and share, and there were always stories and lots of laughter.
Battletown had a lot of characters that were funny in their own way.
Goat was selling his couch on Tradio. He's like, oh, it's like brand new. It only cost you $50. Oh my gosh, it's an amazing couch. And so the announcer's like, well, if it's such a great couch, why are you selling it? And he's like, because I'm tired of mowing around it.
Most everyone in Battletown had a nickname. It wasn't to make fun, but kind of an endearing connection with one another.
Mike Thompson was Bulldog, Ham Hamilton, Red Eye Hockman, Stiff Lawson.
And there was a man that was called Bush Hog. and his son was called Weed Eater.
Everybody was there for each other, and I've heard it tell that my grandmother was a quilter, and those quilts were made and given when a family lost their home to a fire. People would just come together and help those people build back.
One man had his face blown off by a shotgun from here down, and he was the scariest looking individual I've ever seen. And he had a hole in his throat, and that's how he would pour his nutrients in. He was such a scary guy. But people embraced him and looked past that and looked at the person he was.
There was a quarry that took interest and moved into Battletown, and at the beginning it didn't affect us much, but they kept buying up more and more land. Even if someone didn't want to sell, they would just make their house like an island around just big crater holes in the ground and stuff, to the point where they eventually did just sell them their land, to the point where a lot of places in Battletown are not even recognizable now. Where my granddad and grandmother's house was, you can't even tell.
Most of all, I love the memories made in the Battletown community. The town has changed now. Only one church, a part-time post office, and the big box grocery stores have closed, the ones in Battletown. The town is a little faded to me, mostly because of my parents and other family members passing away.
It was hard selling my granny's house. And it wasn't really the house and the stuff. It was just the thought that I would have no reason to visit.
It had some kind of a charm, you know. It's kind of lost that.
It's not a place where you can go visit and hear stories anymore.
It used to be I knew everybody. Now I don't know anybody hardly.
But the one thing that stays the same is your friendship to the people that you grew up with, that you were around.
Just the sense of community and seeing people, and that I knew that if I was in trouble, or if I was hurt, or if I needed help getting home, that they would just help me.
I saw people who immediately would go over to mow somebody's yard if they weren't feeling well, or bring them food if someone had passed away.
The town is faded, but the heart is still there in the memories I hold dear. Battletown was where I found love, the love from people.
But the magic of the place was the people and the essence of the town and who they were and how they were.
It definitely was a part of our history that has shaped us and our values and what we feel is important.
It was such a blessing to grow up there and to be loved there.
If every child could have the experience of being raised in Battletown, the world would be a lot better off.